How long have you been doing this in the first, well, like I said, the podcasting thing?
Yeah, since 2021 is when I started mine. And I think that's when I started guesting, like later that year I started guesting on shows.
Okay. Nice. How's
Yeah.
that for you? Obviously,
I
so
like it.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I learn something new every day. I started podcasting more so out of like a selfish thing where I wanted to meet other people and other experts. So I wanted to basically just learn more that I didn't know what direction to do, so I had experts come on the show, and I would just ask them questions that most people don't know about, but also me, because 'cause I'm not an expert in that particular field,
Yeah.
so it's
Okay.
been
Is
cool.
it like, are they experts within the kind of, I guess, not mental health, but relationship coaching
Yeah.
arena? But
Yeah, usually they're either some sort of, like, specialized relationship coach, or they have some sort of licensure as a therapist, or, sometimes even medical doctors, things like that. But I like to have people who have credibility, and even the people who just have real life lived experience, I think are just as, crucial to have on the show. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Credibility is always good. So, like I said, thank you again for coming on.
Of
And with
course.
that, I'll just jump right into it. So, yeah, today's guest is Paige Bond. Did I pronounce that correctly? That seems
Yes, you
pretty
did.
standard. I love that about people names. It's pretty
Yeah.
easy to pronounce for the most
Yeah.
part. Although the English language can be quite complicated sometimes. But as I
Yes.
mentioned, today's guest is Paige Bond. She's recognized by datingadvice.com as one of the best relationship coaches in 2023, where she specializes in helping individuals, couples, and I guess groups and navigate the complex dynamics of non monogamous relationships with her innovative approaches and keen insights. Not only is she the founder of Couples Counseling of Central Florida, but she's also the host of the Stubborn Love podcast. And with that, welcome to the For All My Friends podcast, Paige. It's nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was such a really cool intro, and I think I might listen to this back and take that as my intro bio for how I introduce myself.
You can have it for free. Happy to do that for a friend. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to dive in, and we'll see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, it should be fun. I mean, I'm honestly just looking forward to having a good time learning a little bit about you and what you've been up to, and specifically, for those that are watching that aren't too familiar with the term, if you do the audience a favor, could you, I guess, could you define polyamory?
Yeah, so polyamory is one part on a big wide spectrum of different variations of non-monogamy. And so polyamory in particular, if you break down the words into where the origins come from, poly means many, amory means love. So the ability, capacity, and intentionality behind polyamory is loving more than one all at one time. So when you think about a relationship, many people have this mindset that we come in pairs, we come in twos. We always hear couple. Um, but we can be more expanded from just loving one person at a time. And so polyamory welcomes the thought and ability, the actions of loving more than one person at once.
So, I guess there's a difference between obviously loving someone and being in love with someone, right? Because obviously I have the capacity to love all my friends and my relatives, some of them more so than others, et cetera, et cetera. But being in love with someone, it seems like, at least from my perspective, and having, born following not normal cultural norms, but I
Yeah.
guess more popular ones. I'm trying to wrap my head around just how much time commitment it would be to be involved with more than one person on that
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good thing to be thinking about. And it is definitely something that is important to take into consideration when one, you're deciding what your saturation rate is of being able to be the kind of good partner you're wanting to be, but also what your partner is needing you to be, right? So something we talk about is polysaturation. And that essentially means, hey, how many partners can I take on and give all of myself to, and also be receiving what I want to be receiving in these relationships? How many partners can I take on to a point to where it gets to the point of the relationships are suffering because I'm investing too much. I'm spreading too thin of this line here. So that's a really good thing to take note of is how much emotional capacity do you have? How much time capacity? There is a time commitment when we love people, but there's just so many different variations that we can have in non-monogamy where some people practice something called solo polyamory, where they generally don't even, they may not even have a person that they're living with and cohabitating with, but they'll still have multiple partners. They might just they might prefer a quieter lifestyle. They may be traveling a lot, so they don't necessarily have like a person, back at home, but they'll have maybe multiple people that they see in various places, but still have the real investment of love, have the real investment of this is a relationship. And as long as it's where the other person is knowing how much of an investment that they're getting into and that they'll be receiving and that they're consenting to that, then it's working out for everybody. But it is not for everybody. And that's where I think a lot of people give flack to the non-monogamous community, because I think a lot of people just can't fathom or wrap their head around giving attention, time, everything, energy to more than one person, because even one person can be a lot sometimes.
I was just about to say, while we're talking about this, I'm thinking of just like juggling a ball. Personally, I can't juggle a ball. It's like my relationships, right? I can only take on one at a time. Uh, so that being said, I'm kind of curious to know, what is the high side you've seen being an expert in this field? And obviously, I know the low side. That's like someone like myself, obviously.
Yeah, so like the high side as in like how many partners, like what has been the maximum I've seen?
Yeah, like how many balls have you seen someone juggle before being in this role?
Yeah, so I've seen people who were all invested in relationships with each other. The max amount that I have directly worked with has been four. And it does get complicated, right? Because when we have four people, it's not just one relationship. We have a relationship with the first two, and then one and three, and then I'm trying to use my fingers to give you an example, but one and four. And then we have all of that as a relationship, and then we go backwards. And so it's like a multiple of four. It's not just as simple as we might think.
Is it, I guess, when you see examples of four, okay, I was hoping to get into this later, but it just makes sense to get into it now. I guess, do you ever see like the red-headed stepchild, maybe is the term to put it, or like a black sheep, or as someone feels, like hey, you guys maybe slept together without me, and I was just out getting groceries for us all, and you could have waited. Does
Yeah.
anything like that ever happen, or
Oh,
mine's obviously running all over the place, but
yeah.
uh,
Your mind is in the right place. Yeah, that definitely happens, and that sounds very similar to some experiences I've heard, like, people do get left out, I mean, just like any other situation in relationships, sometimes we spontaneously have an intimate charge and we're wanting to release that with people, and we have, person next to us that we love and we cherish, and we want to expand that on them. But yeah, sometimes it does happen where people will get left out in sexual experiences. It can be more emotional experiences, or just maybe a date that they wanted to do. And there are times where people are getting left out. There are just issues with jealousy that come about. And more often times than not, it comes out in ways where we're communicating it from a really angry place rather than with the hurt feelings place. And so then this is where we just run in circles with poor communication. And usually people come see me.
Really? Okay, interesting. Um, I want to come back to jealousy, uh, but I want to understand. Honestly, I want to learn a little bit more about yourself before we really dive into this. But I really will circle back to jealousy. I have that highlighted for sure, so we'll dive into that certainly. But want to learn a little bit about you a little bit more. So, just as a quick intro, not that I'm a big reader, not to give anyone that illusion. Uh, but Oscar Wilde once said, "Bigamy is having one wife too many. Monogamy is the same." So, if you have one wife or husband that bitches all the time, for instance, is a slob, a shopaholic, etc., like why would you want to? I completely understand that. Considering what you do, obviously, uh, you obviously don't feel similarly. So, how did you first come across this topic in the first place?
Yeah, this wasn't something I was necessarily researching for. This kind of fell into my lap. So it was early on in my career, not too long after I finished grad school. I had started getting into my own private practice where I get to see my own clients. I get to, have my website, put what I want on there and let people find me and see if I'm a good fit for them. And on my website, I put that I'm a sex positive therapist because I want people to know it's normal to talk about sex. It's normal to talk about just different relational things that maybe people don't usually feel comfortable with, especially coming to therapy. I think there's a lot of things that even going into therapy to see a therapist, people feel nervous about talking with their therapist. So I put on my website, I'm like, hey, I'm a sex positive affirming therapist. Let's get to work. And this fell into my lap by having like very early on, many clients actually having some sort of non-monogamous aspect to their relationship. And I'm like, well, shit. No one prepared me for this. Grad school didn't talk about non-monogamy. I've only had training in couples therapy, so I need to do a lot of reading to learn about non-monogamous relationships.
Mm.
And it was just something that I dove into like as a professional interest because I'm like, why the fuck haven't we learned about this? This is just a different way of doing relationships, but there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing bad about it. There's nothing morally wrong with it. So why did I not get education on it? Um, so through that frustration, grew my passion to just learn more about it, educate more people about it, and be better at it. I'm an overachiever and I want to be the best at things. And so I started really diving into podcasts, books, trainings, you name it, that I could to be able to better understand and actually help this population.
Yeah, it's certainly something to wrap your head around. So I guess my first question to you is how do I get my wife to consider a polygamous relationship?
Yeah. Well, so that's a lot
That
of
was
layers. No,
that was
that's one question.
that was a joke. Hey, I have a friend who's
Yeah.
interested in doing something like this. I have to say I am joking, completely joking. I just got married, so not open that door quite yet. Who knows? But yeah, for those who are, I guess, how does this typically work? Like, I feel like you have to go into a relationship kind of establishing those rules, or it seems like really difficult to be in a relationship and then all of a sudden bring this up. Am I wrong
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, I won't say that you're wrong, but I also won't say that you're right. I would say that it can be easier knowing going in what you're getting into or knowing what the possibilities could be. Having those conversations very early on before making whatever kind of commitment you want with the person. It's always good to know to have all the information you can up front. But also on the same side of that, we are ever evolving human beings that change over time and our desires may not be the same as, maybe if we're high school sweethearts or maybe we met right after college and we start to get curious about some other things and this could be a really self-exploratory journey that people want to really tend to on the side of like their own personal development. And who's to say to that person, no, don't explore yourself. No, don't like put yourself in a box and don't see what the possibility is. And so it's hard, right? Because on one hand, yeah, it'd be great to have all that information up front, but also number two, sometimes this isn't known information at the beginning otherwise, but it could be lit up later. And what are we gonna do when it happens?
Yeah. It seems like having that conversation up front would be easier than having one in the middle of a relationship, though. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. That actually it happened in one of my relationships, where we established going in that we were monogamous, and then I don't know, about like a year and a half in or so, they actually presented to me like, "Hey, I'm thinking about being interested in this. Would you be interested in sticking around? Like, while this is an exploration, is this something that you want to explore part of yourself while we're doing a relationship?" So this situation actually happened to me. And I have a lot of experience on what not to do. And like how not to go about it. And from that experience, I've really translated a lot of that in my professional work to help people know what are the better and easier ways that we can go about this, where it feels like we're respecting everyone's autonomy and respecting your own desire. Because sometimes it doesn't work out where people stay in the relationship together when this is brought up. Sometimes it can, and it can be really great and really beautiful, but there's so much that goes into it that has to make that to happen in a happy and a consensual and a respectful way.
Obviously, you're well read on this topic, but I imagine hearing that must have been tough. Forgive me for asking, but I imagine was that a tough experience to go through, or were you just like, oh, I this is like classic page 82, read that, you know what I mean?
Mm.
W-
You
was it like,
know,
or was it more like shock? I guess like, yeah, I guess your emotions tugging at you. Can I ask? Is that rude? I'm sorry. This
yeah,
is my
ask. Yeah.
yeah.
No, no, it is totally fine to be curious. I mean, yeah, at the time I was like pretty in shock. I'm like, wait, what the F? I thought it was you and me till the end, boo. Like what's going on here? And so that was something that I had to actually take some time to think on. And I took a lot more time than I thought I would, about like how to like what was the next step? Because this just wasn't something that had interested me with this person, but had been an idea in past relationships, or, I had struggled with having commitment early on in my relationships. And I thought it would be fine to have like multiple relationships. And so, in a sense, there's this part of me who was curious about it, who was like, well, given my track record, I mean, maybe this could be something that actually fits for me. Maybe this is something that could be a part of who I am. Maybe this is something that can fit our lifestyle. But hearing it was pretty tough because it was a total shock. I had no idea. And on one hand, when the idea was presented to me, it was presented to me as my partner was saying, "Hey, I think I'm polyamorous." Which that was the biggest shock for me because that wasn't something that was ever indicated, but when he described what he was looking for, he was more interested in sexual relationships only and not necessarily polyamory, which is loving many people, having more than one partners. And so that getting my head wrapped around that took some time in adjusting, but felt like a more of a relief for me. I was like, okay, I think that's something that I could work with and explore. Little did I know that, the the way I went about it and the way that he went about it was not in collaboration with each other, which is like number one downfall of anyone trying to navigate this. You have to work with each other to try to actually make this happen. If someone is telling you, what they're comfortable with and what their boundary is, pushing against it isn't going to help that person feel safer. And going out and doing something otherwise doesn't keep the bond of trust built. And so we just didn't have really good communication skills. That was at the core of it. There could have probably been just so many better ways that we went about going about this, but even our communication outside of talking about this particular topic wasn't up to par. So I think that's the biggest downfall, at least just starting out. A lot of times people get to a point where they're thinking that non-monogamy is going to save their relationship, or if they have a dead bedroom, they're like, well, we're not having sex anyways. What if I just go out and get it somewhere else? And so they bring it up to their spouse in hopes. And then their spouse is like, yeah, sure, whatever. And not thinking about all of the repercussions of, wait, we don't have good communication. We're not having good emotional connections. We actually don't have a lot of trust and safety established in our relationship. And then they go on to open their relationship and boom, explosion happens.
This reminds me of a couple stories I've read on the internet where it's kind of a common scenario, it seems like, where it's maybe like a dead bedroom. The guy wants to open the relationship up. Obviously he wants to try his hand, obviously, different sexual partners. And he brings it up to the wife, and usually the wife is kind of shocked at first. Obviously, it's not a conversation you're expecting on any day. And typically speaking, in my experience, women have an easier time lining up dates than men do. Maybe that's just my experience. Could be anecdotal. You're nodding your head, so I imagine you agree. So that typically happens. A woman has some dates, etc. She brings guys home. Maybe the guys, maybe not bring them home, but
Has experiences.
yeah, more or less. The guy starts to get jealous. Maybe he doesn't think of the ramifications of his actions, right? And the consequences and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, and then obviously he wants to close the marriage, oftentimes because of the jealousy, in which case the woman has, I guess, found her new thing and doesn't want to close it, and then that relationship typically fractures. That's typically what I read. So I'm guessing, is that common? Do you come across that quite a bit?
Oh, I mean, sometimes I come across those types of cases and they're at different points in time. Sometimes it's at the beginning before that happens. Sometimes it's in the midst of it happening where the fracturing is happening and we might be trying to repair the primary two-person relationship through that. And sometimes it's the aftermath, it's already been done and we're trying to figure out, hey, do we save this relationship? Am I still non-monogamous? Do I want to be monogamous with this new person and not be with, the original partner I had going into this? So there's just so many different ways that it can turn out. But yes, the what you described sounds very familiar in my line of work.
Oh man, I can only imagine like a couple bringing like a couple and the guy bringing in someone into the relationship thinking everything's gonna smooth out, and I wonder if that partner he brings in ever leaves with the other partner and just leaves that person behind. I have to imagine that's happened, but
I've seen it happen. It does happen where they leave the original person behind because they were realizing that, they and it's I don't want to say it's funny, but it's almost ironic because the person who originally didn't want the more open relationship as enthusiastically as the, other partner, they find what they were looking for in that new person and they don't need um what they were originally getting from that original, usually from my experience it's a marriage partner, and sometimes they end up divorcing.
forgive me if this sounds insensitive, but from an outside perspective, that sounds kind of hilarious. So like sometimes like just the optics from the outside. I mean, I hope that you can see the humor in it, but obviously that's terrible for
Yeah.
the person who obviously gets left. But that sounds like something you'd see in like a Friends episode or some sort of sitcom.
Yeah, it's like you can't it's like you think that it's almost like a story that someone made up, like that it's a sitcom, you're right, like that how could we actually be doing this in real life? But it happens, and it is really sad, and sometimes they're really understanding, and they get that, and they get why the other person is choosing to move on with someone else, and then sometimes there's a lot of aftermath we're dealing with, and a lot of insecurity that comes up because of that, because why not, right? Your partner just left you of, however how long, but, a strong commitment, so, yeah, I see a lot of heartbreak in the business too.
Totally, totally. Um, what are some what are some common misconceptions you encounter about non-monogamy, and how do you address them in your coaching?
I would say common misconceptions are that it has to be like one certain way. I think people watch a movie or read about some sort of like article online or maybe hear something from their friends and they're like, oh, okay, so this is how it has to be. And I think a misconception is you don't realize that you can design your relationship exactly how you want it to be. And this goes for monogamous, non monogamous, the whole spectrum of relationships. You can design how you want to structure your relationship based on the agreements, based on the collaboration with the other person or other people. And so I like to view non-monogamy on a spectrum. A therapist that I follow, Tammy Nelson, like talks about like there's like different intensities of like different types of commitment or like what's involved in non-monogamy. And so like I think of polyamory more so on one side of the spectrum where you're really tied in and you're intertwined because love is involved. Sometimes within that there's different types of commitment, whether that be financial commitment, whether that be a physical commitment where you're living in the same space, maybe you're co-parenting. So I think of that as, we have a lot intertwined here. Whereas maybe if we go further away from that side of the spectrum and it's swinging and we're focused on maybe only sexual relationships, okay, maybe I'll see you at the club and have sex with you, but I'm not, asking you to pick up Charlie at pickup school next Friday, right? So it's various different types of intensities between the different types of non-monogamy that people choose, and you can choose how you want to structure it yourself.
Do you see jealousy more common amongst that first part or that second part, like the sexual aspect or the familiar, the family aspect of it?
Yeah, I would say that it's more so the emotional bond that gets people riled up a lot more. I think maybe earlier in my work I was getting a bit more, and maybe this is just because I was seeing a lot more people who identified as swingers, and more so now I'm seeing people who are wanting the more emotional side of the relationship. But I see people more torn by, oh, my partner's having this time commitment with someone else. Oh, my partner is doing this activity that I really wanted to do with them. And now I feel really bad that we didn't get to do that together. So, more so on that first side of the spectrum.
That seems that seems to make sense to me, honestly. It would be hard to get over that jealousy aspect, and like I said, we'll dive into that in a second. But I guess what are the I guess you kind of mentioned this earlier, but can you explain the differences specifically about like open relationships and polyamorous relationships for those that aren't too familiar?
Yeah. And I also say this with a disclaimer that everyone can also create their own unique definition behind this. So give me, a little bit of slack here if yours might be a little bit different. But so when we think of polyamory, having love and an emotional commitment invested in those types of bonds, again, with more than one outside person. And in polyamory, this can be done, various ways. So let's say I'm a person and I'm dating Johnny over here. And Johnny decides that, he wants to have a girlfriend. We have a good talk about it. Cool. It's cool with all of us. We're on board. Johnny goes to get a girlfriend. And what can happen is we can do something called kitchen table polyamory. And that essentially means that, hey, we're all good here. We're all good friends. We're all on board with this. I might even actually hang out with Johnny's partner, um, for to build our friendship or whatever. I may not necessarily be dating them or have a romantic attraction to them. I may or may not have sexual relations with that partner, but we call it kitchen table poly because everybody's on board, everybody's having a good time, nobody hates anybody's guts, and we can talk about it and be open about it. Another version can be something that's labeled parallel polyamory, where we have mine and Johnny's relationship over here, and then Johnny and his girlfriend's relationship over there. We never intersect. It's parallel polyamory. So we don't really have conversations, probably don't hate each other, but don't need to keep in contact with each other, right?
Is
And
I would think that there's more jealousy there, going back to what you were talking about, you guys are doing something I wanted to be a part of, whether that be, the trip to Paris that that I always wanted to go to, you took Susan to, and God damn you, Roger, things like that. Is that seems really tough to navigate. I guess which do you see more issues with, the parallel ones or the ones I feel like the ones where it's kitchen table, is that what you called it or they call it?
yeah, yeah, kitchen
Uh,
table.
it seems like much more equitable and communal, I guess. I guess, yeah. Do you see more jealousy amongst the parallel ones?
Yeah, if I were to quantify it, I would say more so the parallel ones because and this is just from my anecdotal experience and just to bring in some sciencey stuff here. When we don't know what's happening in other relationships, our brain loves to make up scenarios. And so our brain can build out, Johnny's girlfriend Susan to be this beautiful, voluptuous person that maybe I could never dream to be, but I've always wanted to be. And so already my brain is going into this comparison place of like, oh, she's so much better than me. When if I got to know her maybe, and again, we don't want to force friendships because we don't want to be disingenuous, but if there's a possibility to be a friend with Susan, why not be? Why not be more communal? And that's what polyamory is rooted in is we're all in this community together. We're friendly, we're neighbors, we want to help each other. Like let's let love expand rather than restrict our connections with others. And so I would say the problem with the parallel polyamory is one aspect can be something involved called a don't ask, don't tell policy. And depending on how people come up with that, can be good for the relationship or it can hurt the relationship. And usually it's more so the hurting the relationship because they're doing it for reasons of avoidance rather than, hey, let's talk about all these things, make sure we're actually good to go here instead of, oh no, you go do that thing, but don't tell me about it because that would really hurt me if I knew. So I'm gonna sit here all by myself and let my brain make up these worst case scenarios.
I was gonna say, wouldn't that drive you fucking insane? Just being like, oh, was traffic heavy today, or are you constant? I would go mad.
Yeah, yeah,
My wife already tracks me on Find My Friends, but that would be on another level. So
yeah, yeah. And so what I like to do is just help people understand that if we are more explicit in our communication, if we are more explicit in boundary setting, then we can avoid a lot of heartache. Then we can avoid a lot of those intense jealousy feelings. Now, I won't say that jealousy won't pop up because that's normal. That happens in monogamous relationships. That affects everybody. So that's not unique to polyamory or any type of non-monogamy, but we can still save ourselves a lot of hurt feelings if we were a bit more open and clear when we communicated our actual desires and our needs in relationships.
when you have these groups and it seems like there's a hierarchy, right? Like maybe in some of these relationships where it's, hey, this is the group, this is the kitchen table or the Knights of the Round Table, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. And then you might have some let's just say for simplicity's sake, like side relationships, right?
Yeah.
An outsider that is hooking up with Johnny, as you say, and then Johnny might try to bring in one of the other friend knights from the round table into this other relationship as well. I mean, I would just imagine there's going to come a point where a couple members of the group want to have a relationship with a member or some person, some external individual, and someone from the Knights Roundtable, for lack of a better term, is not going to want to be involved in that relationship. Does that ever sow resentment, contempt? I guess I don't even know, jealousy, all of the above. How does that come up
Yeah.
ever?
Yeah, it can come up. I don't often work with dynamics necessarily that way. Usually what gets brought to my office is a couple trying to navigate the dynamics of one person wants to do non-monogamy this way, this person wants to do non-monogamy this way, or is deciding if non-monogamy might be for them or if they want to be monogamous. So oftentimes I'm getting those two dynamics coming into my office. But when thinking about, there are lots of situations where that does come up where, hey, Johnny here wants to go have this relationship with that person. They're kind of outside of our circle of who we're usually used to or who we've talked about being used to. Or maybe there was a rule of don't fuck my friends and Johnny really wants to fuck my friend,
Mm.
right? And so, yeah, that does come up as a conflict. And we do have to talk about these things and talk about the importance of it. The main thing that I try to really get into everybody's head when we're going about these different desires that we're wanting to explore. If we're wanting to keep our relationship, I'll say the original relationship before it expanded, let's say if it's a monogamous who's opening up into a non-monogamous one, we have to make sure that we create a place of security for all the partners. If we start going into a relationship and thinking, okay, well, I really want to do this thing. I really want to go, fuck Susan's friend, but she says she didn't want me to do that. Johnny needs to come up with a really good reason why that's going to benefit their relationship as a whole. He
Hmm.
needs to prove why it's important to him. He needs to talk about what is the value that will bring both to him and his personal development and to the relationship as a whole.
That is a sales pitch I would love to sit in. That sounds super, super duper fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so are there any other, I guess, are there any other big misconceptions about non-monogamous relationships that you want to cover?
I mean, one thing that I think people get confused on is that they're just sex crazed, and that's just not simply the case. They're just humans with a a libido. There's some people again who may have a higher libido and be interested in having more sex or having a diversity of more sexual partners or just different sexual experiences, especially if we're talking about kink BDSM involvement, and maybe the original partner isn't interested in exploring that. So this is a way for them to be able to explore that side of themselves. And so I just really wish the general population knew it wasn't always about sex. I wish the general population knew that this isn't an excuse for cheating. This is stop fucking around. This is how people live and this is what they desire. And I like to relate it to um if we were thinking about it for a sexuality standpoint, and I'm talking to someone who tells me that they're bisexual, and they're saying that they committed to a monogamous partner at the beginning of their marriage, later came out as bisexual, wants to really explore that, but isn't getting that because maybe the partner they originally came in with, they don't want to explore non-monogamy. Well, they're now trapping themselves inside of that box and working from only one aspect of their sexuality. So I view this just as a beautiful way of people to be self-expressed in the way that they seek fulfillment in their life.
I guess what's hard to wrap around with, or I guess if I think about it from my relationship, for instance, like if I found out that my partner wanted to seek out other relationships, like sexual, I understand a little bit more just because I'm a man and I feel like that just comes a little bit more naturally to men. If I found out that there was some sort of element missing in our relationship that she was getting somewhere else, I'd feel really inadequate. And I would naturally, I don't know if it's natural, but I would question whether or not I was the right person for her
Mm.
because of that. Is that something you come across? Is that normal?
Yeah,
This
so
is
let me
free therapy. This is free therapy that you're giving me now.
I know. So that's actually another thing that I like love to talk about, like, because from that mindset, that's the monogamous bias, right? Where we think that it's I have to be this one person to fulfill all my partner's needs. And if they're interested in something else somewhere else, that means I've failed somehow. That means I'm not the right person for them, right? And like you said, you would feel this sense of inadequacy. But I would maybe even challenge you if your partner said that to you and said, "You fulfill everything for me. This isn't about you. This is about me. And you are so more than adequate for our relationship. And I'm feeling so fulfilled and so secure that I do want to go explore." Now, that lands for some people, doesn't for everybody. But having the knowledge of, like, oh shit, okay, I actually am like everything I need to be. I'm everything that my partner needs me to be to have a fully functioning, secure relationship. So maybe there isn't anything wrong with me. If we can have that mindset, and this is really hard to get to, this sounds like it's easy, but a lot of us are coming from a place of that inadequacy, of the I'm not good enough. And this is something I struggled to with as well when I was trying to explore if this was right for me. That's where the jealousy comes in, that's where the insecurity comes in. But if we can be in a place where we're like, all right, we're both feeling pretty solid. Um, how could this benefit the both of us? It might land differently.
I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, there's a part of me in the back of my mind that all it's hearing is, "No, babe, you're everything I need and more. I just still want to fuck Susan." Y-
Yeah.
Uh, is that crazy of me to think?
No, I mean, I think that's a very natural, like, how can we as humans, especially conditioned in a society where monogamy is the goal, the marriage, kids, whatever, like all of that relationship escalators, we're almost like conditioned to view relationships in one sort of way, right? Like in all the movies you see the girl gets the guy gets the girl, or you'll see if there's a love triangle involved, and that they have to choose between one of them. We are not given any kind of media that sets us up for an idea that there could be a possibility where it's like, oh, there's no love triangle. They can actually choose anyone they want and everyone they want.
Hmm.
So I would say that's not off base here for the thought you still think, even if they might tell you that.
I'm curious to know now, like, what would happen if that was more common in media, right? Like, if you saw that in movies more and that was more popularized and was more accepted. I mean, obviously, like, mental health has made a huge advancement over the past however many years. Do you see something similarly happening here in this, and I guess in your space? Do you see like more clients? I guess, is that more common? What are your thoughts?
I would say, and again, I'm almost like biased because I would say about 90% of my caseload is some sort of variation of non-monogamy or past non-monogamy. So I again am only pigeonholed into not seeing as many monogamous relationships as I did in the beginning of my work.
Sure.
But I think I think we are moving in a different direction. I just don't know if the direction is showing examples of like good, healthy relationships of how it can actually work non-monogamously. Like, I haven't gotten a chance to watch the show, but there's a show that came out called Couple to Throuple. And I want to do a whole psychoanalysis of the show, like so bad, because it's something where like there's contestants of couples coming to, I don't know, it's probably some romantic island or something. And they're trying to test in their relationship to see if they want to add someone into their dynamic as a third. So couple
Okay.
to throuple.
Yeah.
From the reviews I've seen about the show, the way they were going about it and treating the people who were interested in being added to the couple, they kind of treat them like a piece of meat from the reviews that I've seen and not like humans rather.
Is it like a
Um,
chat view? It's like, oh, this person didn't even submit a cover letter. There's no way we're even thinking about such a lazy individual in this A team. Is it like that or
More so along the lines of like um something that's a very common term called couples privilege in the world of non-monogamy, where couples privilege essentially sets up any other dynamic at a disadvantage. Okay, you go to file your taxes. Are you married or filing single? Well, married, we can only get married to one other partner legally in the United States. And
Mm,
so, okay, only one of those partners gets the privilege, but what about a cohabitating throuple or a cohabitating quad? They don't get the same advantages as the original couple that's on paper? Interesting.
yeah.
Um, it can even be like for freaking like if you think about like paint and sit night or something like that. A couple's ticket, right? So two people that we exclude all other variations of different relationship structures, just like as a natural, like a baseline that we do. We don't think about it. So I know I'm kind of getting like way off topic here, but in the terms of couples privilege, we kind of provide like this sense of like safety and security for only the two people. And sometimes this isn't the most beautiful way to do it, but sometimes the couples will be like, all right, we can explore non-monogamy, but if I have a lot of trouble with it, you have to stop dating your girlfriend. And so we call that veto power, right? To
Make
which we're dealing with a real person with real human feelings. And to be able to just say, bye bye, relationship, my wife doesn't like you. I mean, if we started getting into this relationship to be able to expand, our awareness, our emotional connections, and then just drop them like a piece of liver, like that they don't
yeah.
mean anything, that's really hurtful and damaging.
I mean, I guess to compare it to like employees in a workplace, it's almost like, oh, we've been here longer, we've been through the struggles of this workplace longer, more tenure, whatever it is. There's like a closer bond, and then there's this new employee kind of coming in. Yes, he's part of the team on paper, but they're new. We're not sure if this is gonna work out. Let's try them
Yeah.
out. They're like on
Yeah.
I don't know, like a probationary period. I don't know.
Right.
Is that common?
Yeah, yeah, yep. Especially common. I don't know if this is for fun or if I do it for professional. Because it's just always so interesting. But I'll go on the subreddits of like open marriage or non-monogamy or polyamory, and I'll kind of like look at the situations that they might be going through. I'm like, one, this is very common. I see it in my work with the clients I work with. But yeah, oftentimes we forget that we're dealing with other humans here and that there's some feelings on the other side of that person we're breaking up with where they were under the impression that they would have, maybe just as much say in the relationship or that there was a higher intensity of commitment than they were led to believe. So it can get
Hmm,
complicated.
interesting. Is it like, oh, we're going to delete the personal messages to each other on our phone, and instead we're going to start a new group thread where we all talk to each other on this thread,
It
Do you,
depends,
I guess, yeah, I imagine you still have direct communication with individuals, but I
right?
it's like, okay, now we have to get used to using this new thread. Uh, yeah, now there's 3 of us or 4 of us. That sounds like
Mhm.
so complicated, especially with I mean, it's already complicated with two, right? In so many different levels. Like,
Well, think about
obviously,
it. How many people go out and cheat when they're in a quote monogamous relationship? The cheating rates are just exorbitant. Like I don't remember the stats, so I'm not going to say any here on the podcast, but it's just insane, right? And some of those I can, just give a handful of, okay, those can be people who are trying to exit the relationship. Some of those are, they are, more so power and control, and they were trying to hurt the partner. But some of those, maybe we're trying to explore what the idea of non-monogamy could look like for them. They didn't have the word for it, to how to have the conversation to be able to like communicate that was a desire. They don't have the template. They don't have any media showing them what it could look like. And so they end up in trouble. I'm not condoning like cheating as a good thing, but I'm just thinking about like there's so many monogamous relationships, quote monogamous, but even those don't end up doing so well. So
yeah,
the comparison that I just like can't stand hearing is like when people give polyamory or any type of non-monogamy so much shit, I'm like, yeah, how are y'all doing over there in monogamy? You doing okay? Like,
that's true. That's true. A lot of people have the propensity to cheat, and that is, I think that definitely there's something there. There's something there to explore, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, you have a good point. I mean, honestly, it's so hard to get out of this mindset that I've been conditioned to. It's like, okay, well, we're just going to open this up. I mean, the idea of my partner being with someone else is like, you just, I'm not saying OJ Simpson did it, but if he did do it, you just kind of understand. Not saying it's right. It's not right to hurt people. Violence is never the answer. But you at least understand. If that were true, you at least understand why he did it, right? That is so. Would you say? I guess
both.
what are you? What are the? Guess what are the biggest challenges that you come across when dealing with these couples when they come to therapy? Like, what are the most common ones? Is it the jealousy one? I imagine.
I used to think it was, um, but I think the if you go even deeper than the jealousy, there's something like stirring up to make the jealousy happen, to make it feel like that there's something off balance here. When jealousy comes into your relationship, that means there is something out there in the distance making this uncomfortable for one or both partners. And I think what's underneath that is betrayal. I see betrayal most often in my relationship, ship therapy, my relationship coaching. And that can be either, "Hey, I didn't tell you that I was talking to somebody yet, and we have plans for a date, and now here's all this news, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you." And then that becomes as a betrayal for that person for not having the information at the expected time that they would be receiving the information. Still on board for exploring non-monogamy, but wanted the timing to be different as far as when they would be informed, right? So it could be for something like that. It could be for, oh, you went out and slept with this person that, wasn't part of our agreement of the bounds we came up with for each other. So maybe someone has an agreement of like, oh, I would like to talk to someone, before you end up sleeping with them. First dates, no sleeping, please, with the other person. Well, maybe Johnny got a little carried away here and ends up actually breaking that agreement. So come to my office, we talk about the betrayal. So I would say betrayal is the most common, like number one thing happening as something that we're talking about.
I guess do you ever? I imagine in that case, you'd see a lot of people. I imagine get kind of controlling in that process. Maybe right, like,
Yes
oh,
and no.
no, is that not coming?
Yes and no. It's both.
Um, Interesting. Sorry, I don't know where I was going with that, but
Yeah, controlling with betrayal.
betrayal being the most one. Okay, and then I guess how do you help people overcome that?
Yeah. Yeah,
in
that's
a situation,
what.
obviously, and then obviously, like, that's tough one. That's a tough one to just be like, "Ah, you know what? I should have communicated better." Obviously, I imagine some of these conversations were like, "Oh, if you had written it down, we wouldn't be in this situation," you know?
Oh, it happens even when they write it down.
Really? Is that common? Is there like a, "Here are the 10 commandments posted on the
Every
bathroom
so
door. These are the ones." Yeah, okay.
every so often, I'll have, a relationship dynamic where this is something that they do come up with and they have it in written form or like on a, document on their computer or something of like, all right, well, let's review like what our expectations are, what our agreements that we are collaborating to actually like use as our guideposts in this journey together.
Mm,
Sometimes it works out great, but sometimes people are still breaking those agreements. And what happens like when betrayal happens um, is people who are not totally on board with agreements in the first place, they're going to break them. It's not going to be a big deal to them because they didn't even want them, right? So, if we had the agreement, Johnny's not supposed to sleep with Susan, and Johnny agrees to that, even though he really, really wants to. Um, and then it ends up happening, oh, one drunken night or something, right?
yeah.
That does come up a lot because they weren't really invested into the agreement. So what's important about it when we make agreements, again, we need for it to benefit all the parties involved. So we needed to benefit me, Johnny, Susan, and anyone else in the dynamic.
That sounds tough.
It's a lot of talking that people often don't do.
Because even if Johnny's respectful and doesn't fuck Susan, you know that he wants to, you know? So how do
Yeah.
you I for me personally, not to be like, not that I don't think like I'm a controlling partner, but I'd be like, "Yeah, we're not really hanging out with Susan anymore. We have other obligations, obviously, don't you remember? I told you about them." Um, yeah, I f jealousy would just
hmm
naturally come from me personally.
Yeah. And that's what and see that's where it can get complicated is because again, somehow in the model of where people learned how to do relationships, they think that we can tell our partner what to do and what not to do. And that's not free will. We can design boundaries to protect ourselves. And so what would be a lot better in this sense? So let's say I'm the person um in this scenario and I say, Johnny, I understand that you really, really want to have sexual relations with Susan. I understand that if you do that, you're breaking this agreement that we both agreed to. And if that were to come up in the case, I will actually remove myself from a sexual relationship with you to protect myself from STDs because I feel uncomfortable with blah, 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 blah. So that could be an example of a boundary. We can't put boundaries on other people, but I can put a boundary, a little safe force field around myself.
Yeah, right,
People don't often remember that it's about yourself when we're setting boundaries. And oftentimes we're trying to force a boundary onto someone, which is control.
right, right. Going back to jealousy, I guess, how do you help people overcome that?
Yeah. So we talk about the root. And sometimes the jealousy is rooted in the present relationship dynamic. Sometimes it's rooted actually something coming up from the past. Like maybe they felt this way in either a prior relationship and it went all wrong. And when they tried communicating, maybe their partner didn't listen and was very dismissive. And so they learned in that relationship, okay, don't bring up those feelings. But when I do bring up the feelings, I have to be angry and loud and like put myself in this power position to be able to be heard. And so they might have learned that going into this next relationship where maybe that's not necessarily the case. They probably could communicate at a well balanced, respectful manner. But again, they're still acting usually from the trauma from past relationships. So that's one thing we explore, like jealousy, like all across the board. Like, is this the first time you've experienced jealousy? Have you had it in a different relationship? Or heck, even as a kid growing up, like, were you jealous of your sibling? Were you jealous of, a parent, whatever, right? And another thing that I also do is we talk about the difference between jealousy and envy. So a lot of times that gets confused. So jealousy is like this fear of the relationship being threatened. I am worried that the relationship is going to end. I am worried that my partner is going to leave me in this instance, in this situation. Envy is, I really want that experience that Johnny and Susan are having over there. I really wish
Yeah.
that I had that in my relationship. I see they're out there having mint chocolate chip ice cream, and man, I was really hoping for a date like that this week. That's envy. I want that, what they have, brought back to my relationship with them. So we do a bit of education around that. Like, okay, is it jealousy showing up? Does it feel like your relationship is threatened? Or is it something that you feel like is missing out of your relationship? You want that thing, and if your partner were able to bring that to you, you would feel a lot more secure.
I hear what you're saying. Obviously, like sexually, that's one thing. I feel like them getting some sort of something mentally out of the other relationship is another thing, but also the time that they're spending with these other people, I feel like
That's
would
a big
make
one.
me really jealous, right? We kind of talked about
Yeah.
this before. So, how do you go about bringing up like time management for these relationships? Do you just bring up like, hey, time blocking, you know, 2 to 4, I'm talking to Susan, and then 4 to 6 is Jennifer, and finally get a break from for dinner at 6, before I have to talk to Paige at
Yeah.
8, whatever.
Yeah.
So, how do you suggest going about that, general?
I mean, it's different for everybody, like, for what works for their schedule. Sometimes time blocking and using a calendar is very helpful. There's often, a comedic, meme going around, the non-monogamy spaces that, people who, uh, are either involved in the non-monogamous lifestyle or wanting to explore that. There's a joke that they have a kink for calendars and time management. Because sometimes that is what's needed, especially when you're juggling multiple partners. So it can be like that, like time blocking, like you mentioned. It can be as simple as having maybe certain days where they're going out for dates and it's more of like a routine. Just like, let's say you had soccer practice every, Wednesday night, and, your wife knows you leave for soccer practice every week. Okay. She knows that's her time, either, for herself, or if there's kids, taking care of the kids, or doing her own thing, going out with her own friends, right? So it really is dependent on how they like to balance their lifestyles. Oftentimes, what I've seen, and this is probably come about like as one of the biggest struggles in non-monogamy, is that the couples are so fused together, they're almost in this like secret codependent dynamic where when we start to actually unravel it, they realize, oh shoot, we've depended on each other in this way for so long. I didn't realize that in a sense I almost didn't have autonomy, but now I'm wanting to do these other things, whether it be this aspect of exploring a hobby or this aspect of exploring a relationship with another person. And our couple's privilege or our couple's connection has been so intertwined in a way that is really preventing that for both of us. And that's not to say that, like, you want to have a good relationship with your spouse. You want to have a good foundation as a couple, if that's how you're practicing, like primary, secondary hierarchies. But if you're at the point to where you're taking on your partner's feelings, or you are trying to please your partner and really go along with something when it's not something you're on board with, when you're losing yourself in the relationship and you can't really stand on your own without that partner anymore, we need to get back on track to making you a full, complete human being without this other human being. They are supposed to be an addition to you. They are not supposed to complete you. Your partner is not your missing puzzle piece. That's what I believe. Like the whole like soulmates thing, you complete me. Like I don't stand by that mumbo jumbo because I, as a person, can stand on my own. Having a partner added to my life, yes, enhances it, makes it so much better. But if we're like lost in intertwined in this place of um the kind of balance where it's codependent, it can get really tricky.
Yeah, so much to unpack there.
And
Codependency amongst multiple individuals. Uh, I guess any tools, techniques to combat that you help them explore?
yeah, I mean, start with the small decisions of coming into your own of who you are as a human being. I mean, this is something that I struggled with and why it was so rocky trying to explore non-monogamy in that relationship I was mentioning earlier. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know how to communicate what I wanted. And then when my partner was telling me something that they were wanting to do that was actually a different preference or opinion than mine, I spelled the fuck out of that. Like, it was so hard to do. I had all three aspects of differentiation, and this is a term I talk about a lot in my work. I was struggling with all three aspects of differentiation that could have really helped me actually be my own autonomous person, standing on my own 2 feet. If we don't have those three aspects of differentiation of being able to identify what my thoughts and my own feelings and my own beliefs are. And maybe I'm taking on society's, maybe I'm taking on my partner's, what my family is wanting for me instead of my own. And then actually communicating that. If I am being, keeping all of that to myself and not actually telling my partner what I'm truly desiring, again, who are you? Where are you in this relationship? You're lost.
That sounds so exhausting. It took me forever to learn how to communicate properly with my partner. A lot of effort, lots of frustration, lots of fights, lots of frustrating times, but we finally got there. I imagine just adding another to the mix, like another communication style, love language, whatever. It's uh, so much to balance. I guess on one hand, I commend these people for being able to do that, but I just don't have the mental capacity. I don't think I don't have the mental bandwidth to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and many people in monogamous relationships struggle with that. And so a lot of times they think, "Oh yeah, let's add this other aspect in. Let's add another layer of complexity to our relationship." And then that's when it does blow up because there were so many things that they had swept under the rug for so long that they weren't actually communicating about. And they kind of sabotage themselves into it. So I've seen this done so beautifully. If people can actually hold their own and know who they are, know how to communicate, and be able to know that there's differences that are going to come up in relationships where differences doesn't equal bad, conflict does not equal bad, conflict equals opportunity for growth. If they get to have that mindset and their partners are also, I mean, they're gonna be in for a good time and be able to navigate non-monogamy a lot easier than those who don't have those mindsets.
I am. I remember there are a lot of couples for obviously various reasons who were splitting up during COVID. Obviously for like political reasons, mainly being them, but I imagine with like four couples, or not four couples, but four people in a group, five, etc. There's just bound to be some very interesting political debates at the dinner table or the kitchen table, whatever you want to call it. But I
Yeah.
guess did you see? I guess how were you doing this line of work during COVID? Did you see like I guess do you have any interesting stories that you could share? I don't know, but
Yeah, I mean, COVID wasn't really something that was at the crux of the issues. The
sure.
people who were navigating non-monogamy were seeing me for. I mean, I saw that as actually a battle between quite a few monogamous couples. But this wasn't really an aspect that they really had trouble with. Talking about safety protocol, testing, but things like that. I mean, those were aspects of it, but really, like they were in their safe group of people where they felt comfortable and confident in being able to navigate. So that wasn't actually something that came up as an issue most of the time.
Interesting. I would have assumed that would have been the case. Um, any tips that you have for couples who are just starting their polyamory journey?
Yeah. Please don't take any action right now. Please wait. I know it's exciting. I know that you want to just dive in, or maybe you want to like rip the band-aid off. And maybe this has been a topic of contention for a while and you get frustrated and you just say, okay, just go do it. That is the time to not just go do it. Please have conversations where you're open and honest about what you really want. If you are not honest about something and you're agreeing to something where you feel actually pretty yucky in your gut about, and not just the uncomfortable, there's going to
Yeah.
be many situations where we're uncomfortable. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. This is just like a growing spurt for us. But if you get the icky feeling in your gut that you know that this is something that might bring resentment or hurt or maybe even irreparable damage to your relationship, don't make that agreement. Don't go along with it. Speak up. So the advice is to speak up, identify what you really want, and have conversations where you might be able to hear your partner bring a perspective to the table that is probably quite nerve-wracking for them. They're probably really nervous about how you'll react. They're probably nervous about losing you and scared to lose you. So they're being really brave and going out on a limb, even talking about this with you, right? Like I said earlier, like how many times maybe in other situations people just go out and cheat where maybe that relationship actually could have been a great fit for non-monogamy. Maybe that partner would have been totally cool with them having extramarital partners or, sexual partners, whatever it may be, but they didn't bring it up. And now, because of the lie, because of the betrayal, it's ruined. So,
Do you, I'm based on you saying that. I imagine a lot of people feel pressured into saying yes, or like
um,
it up. Oh, like I want to explore this. Does the other partner typically, I would imagine, feel a little bit pressured to want to give that partner their freedom. Obviously, not wanting to at the same time. I
yeah.
would think that that would be the natural instinct or your gut instinct to not want them to explore that, but ultimately you're faced with, are they going to do it anyway? Am I going to lose this person, etc.? So do you feel like a lot of people feel pressured to say yes, and do a lot of people enter into agreement under duress? Not duress,
I
but
knew you were going to say that word. I used that word earlier. Yeah, I would say, like, for me specifically, I see a lot of people because, like, the way I write, about who I am and who I see people pleasers navigating non-monogamy. So, like, hopefully they can identify, like, "Hey, if you feel like you're saying yes to a lot of things when you actually didn't mean to, or maybe when you wanted something else," I see a lot of that. So that's just, like, personally who I feel like I'm a good fit for working with, people who are not so, keen on setting boundaries, on creating boundaries, on enforcing boundaries. Um, and so something that I also like to do and talk about is how important consent is versus coercion. Coercion does happen. Coercion happens in monogamous relationships, but coercion does happen in non-monogamous ones too. And if there's coercion, they are not consenting. And so consent is really of the utmost importance. It's like the crux of doing this kind of different relationship, different from the norm, different from what's presented as monogamy. Consent is, hey, I get to be honest about who I am and I get to be honest about what I desire. Let me see what kind of agreement and collaboration I can do with my partner to make that happen in a way that does work for both of us, in a way that does benefit both of us. But if you have a partner coming to you and saying, I'm going to leave you if you don't let me fuck Susan. I'm sorry, Susan, out there, if you're listening, by the way, and I'm sorry, Johnny, and all the names. I don't know any of these names off the top of my head. I created them. But if they're coming to you and saying, yeah, I'm going to leave you if you don't let me do this, or any kind of statement like that that grabs power and puts it all to one person in the dynamic, that's coercion. We don't want that. That's not consensual non-monogamy.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Any tips for couples who are moving in together? I know you had a little blog
Ooh.
post on that, but I'm sure you want to share some details.
Yeah, so especially if this is a dynamic where there was maybe a couple first and then they expanded into a more open relationship and maybe you're a throuple or a quad or more than that, please communicate ahead of time what your expectations are and what moving in will be like, especially if we're used to doing overnights at separate houses and then maybe on the off nights you don't have your partner around, you kind of have a different routine or something, and now all of a sudden you're moving in, there might be some changes or requests. Like if you're rocking out till 12 a.m. to your stereo system and your partner usually goes to bed at 10 p.m. to wake up for work the next day, that's probably not going to fly moving in together all under one household. Maybe you're going to have to wear earphones or, maybe adjust your sleep schedule. Who knows? So talk about what your expectations are. Talk about what your hopes and dreams are for moving in together. A lot of people don't remember, like, this is a very cool, exciting, happy time. We get high off of the dopamine hit of like the fact of it or the event of it, but we don't actually talk about, hey, I'm really looking forward to getting to see you after work instead of having to, drive an hour and only see you a couple times a week. So talk about those more happy things too.
Seems like you need to be a very effective communicator for these type of relationships to be successful.
100%. Yes.
Quick, maybe not pivot, but I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on the impacts on family, society, things like that. So, like, how do I guess societal norms and pressures impact your clients, and I guess any tools or strategies that you suggest to combat these type of pressures that they might face?
Yeah. So luckily enough, for the clients that I have who are more on that polyamorous side of the spectrum, who are more family style, integrating as, hey, this is the environment we're raising our kids in, yada yada. Luckily, they've had actually a really good experience of friends, coworkers, um, everyone around them being really affirming and accepting. And that hasn't actually come up as an issue of like, oh, what to do next? Oh, how do we navigate this? Because everybody's been on board and really sweet about it. And that is not necessarily everybody's situation, this can be a process. It can also feel like, and it's not something that you have to do, but in some situations where it's like coming out to your family or coming out to your friends about your non-monogamous dynamic, whether that's something that you feel it's an identity as, or that's a chosen lifestyle that you're gravitating to, and it feels a bit more flexible and may not be an innate part of your identity. Those are even like different ways that it can present as, in one sense. But if that's coming about where um, you're needing support and resources around that, I just say go join a community. There's a really great one that I've come across called Plura. They used to go under the company name called Bloom, but they're a community that is very affirming and supportive of all kinds of different relationship dynamics. They've got amazing spaces for queer people, amazing spaces for BIPOC, for the kink community. Go find people because likely you're feeling alone. But you're not. There's so many others out there like you and who have likely already navigated maybe the same issues you're going through. And it really sucks. And I know. And so if you can get connected with someone else who may even be able to just give you a non-judgmental ear, compared to maybe what you've been used to, that can be so uplifting.
And I was kind of surprised to learn upon, like, while doing research into this field, that Wikipedia says 4 to 5% of people are polyamorous. I don't know if those figures are accurate, but that was, to me, I was not aware that the figures were that high.
Yeah, so about the stats of the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, the most recent ones that they did, and granted, this is only US and Canada, so it's very biased against, the whole rest of the world we're forgetting about. But in US and Canada, they found about 20% of people have at least tried or dabbled in some sort of non-monogamous relationship, whether they're currently, past, or like future in one, or not future, but like at some point in their life had either been in one at one point or are currently in one. So that's 20%. And then, yeah, about 4 to 5% are actually currently engaging in a non-monogamous dynamic, whether it's polyamory or a different kind of lifestyle. It could be. And here's the thing that I think a lot of people get mixed up is, again, the spectrum is so wide. Like a non-monogamous dynamic could even be something like monogamish, where it's like, yeah, it's cool if my partner goes out and flirts at the bar and then brings that energy back home with us. Like, sure. And then nothing happens. It doesn't have to be a physical action with someone.
Sure.
So there's so many different ways. So yeah, that number, the 45%, is pretty up to date.
Well, that just goes to show that there are people out there. I'm sure there are plenty of people at these groups, more than people and had anticipated. So to
Yeah.
your point, you go talk to someone if they're struggling with that.
Mhm.
Um, I'm curious to know what role you think online platforms play in shaping the modern perceptions and practices of non-monogamy. Or
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a really great way to help the people who are in long distance relationships feel more connected. Whereas back in the day, you had to pay like a buttload to do long distance calling. Now we can freaking text, we can do FaceTime, and usually at really reasonable or affordable prices. So I think it helps people connect and be able to actually make these relationships better work than they used to.
I didn't even consider the fact that these folks were in long distance relationships. I imagine it's easier if everyone's remote, not remote. I'm thinking like employees and workers, but if everyone's in different locations, everyone hops on the Zoom call, whatever. This is like the not parallel. This is like the kitchen table, right? Everyone's on the same page, etc. That I feel like works better. Um, Imagine it would suck if two people were local and there's a odd man out, right? Guy calling in from Canada or something that you both like, but doesn't get to involve himself with any of the physical stuff. Is that
Yeah.
common or
Well, I would say to that, I mean, again, it's not a replacement for, but with that, they could also have phone sex. They can have Skype sex, whatever it is, right? They may not be physically involved, and maybe that's their love language, and maybe that's like they're really missing out on that, but they can still be involved in different ways. Again, I know it can't be a replacement per se,
that
but
would suck? Just hey, we'll just put you on speakerphone, or we'll set up the Zoom so you can watch, and
yeah.
we'll have a doll and we'll put your name on it.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that, that can also be a kink for someone. They want to watch, they want to be a voyeur, and that can actually be something that they feel really fulfilled in.
That is true. That would be an
Mm.
interesting dynamic. Wow, you probably have some really interesting work
S
conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's so many different ways that people do relationships and that people fulfill their desires, and I just wanna normalize them for people, like, there we don't have to fit in the box of monogamy, and we don't have to fit in the box of what society tells you, like, what makes a relationship, uh, not valuable, but, like, valid. I myself, I'm monogamous, and I'm monogamous with my partner, and a lot of times I think people think that I'm over here flying the flag for non-monogamy and trying to convince everybody to get on board in one way. I'm just trying to freaking normalize it and give people a platform, an opportunity to explore and grow into a dynamic that they might not have explored before, but can be really fulfilling.
Mm. That's interesting. On one hand, I am thankful for folks like yourself who obviously, give these folks a safe space to talk about their feelings and guidance. And on the other hand, I can't help but I guess maybe I don't know if fear is the right word, but I guess worry that not not that you're necessarily promoting polygamy or anything, but I guess if we were to like move towards a more like polygamous society, I kind of worry about like I think about the ramifications of that, right? And I kind of feel like we're kind of experiencing it now to a degree, right? In the sense where people are starting to explore more. Obviously, like folks like yourself are in business. So I don't think 20 years ago that was the case. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know the
It
history.
was there, but not so much out there.
Like this is like we're talking about this openly now. I don't imagine it was the case before, but now you have things like obviously polygamy, but I mean, in doing some research, it looks like there are some folks talking about maybe you could expand on what hypergamy is. Yeah, yeah. Can you expand on that? Are you familiar with the term?
I'm actually not familiar with hypergamy, but polygamy, I know about marriages for one person usually has multiple marriages to many, and they don't have separate relationships outside of that, from my understanding.
So, as far as I could be totally wrong on this, wouldn't be the first time I'm wrong, but from my understanding of hypergamy, it'd be like, okay, if we lived in this society where polygamy was common and that was the cultural norm, uh, based on my understanding, from like a biological perspective, you would have ultimately the end result, like uh, late stage polygamist society, whatever you might call it. You would have the people at the top, right? It'd kind of be like an 80-20 rule, which is like the 20% at the top who have all the resources or wealth, whatever it is, they would maybe be dating, let's say, like 80% of the women, right? And maybe
Really?
you would start to see women, like lots of powerful men just sleeping with most of the women, and then you'd start to see like an incel community or like a community of males who maybe don't have partners now because all of these women are just being, involved with, I don't want to call them alpha males, but for lack of a better term, let's just call them the rich folks, the folks with resources, right? So
Mhm. Mhm.
concern there is we're starting to see this kind of like incel community, right? We have like that is a term that's been being thrown out very commonly. There's you know what I'm talking about. There's a large population of males who are not being partnered up. I guess they're gonna have to just face the reality that they can either better themselves or their genes will die off, right? Like that's just the reality. And although I don't think, uh, I guess I'm afraid to even bring up this guy's name, but like I know Jordan Peterson had talked, and that guy, I know that he had gone through the fires talking about like something about like enforced monogamy, which I don't think anyone should be enforced to do anything, but I do see the value in having monogamy being the cultural norm while understanding that polygamy is fine for some people and that's perfectly cool. But I guess I would be afraid to live in a society where it would be, hey, polygamy is a thing, and Elon Musk has $1 trillion, and even though we see him, I see Elon, once every 3 years, but he pays for my apartment, and it's dope. And I have this great relationship where I talk to him on. I just text him every once in a while. Occasionally, he reads my messages. Occasionally, he even responds. But yeah, I guess the worst case scenario, that's where my mind goes. Where all the alpha
Yeah.
males just have sex with everyone or in relationships with everyone, and then you have a bunch of other folks who just become partnerless and become violent incels or something like that. I think you're starting to see that, right? I mean, you've seen like attacks in public where people have. I don't know if you remember, but like there was, I think the first incel attack was sort of some guy wrote some manifesto. He drove to like UCSB a long time ago. He started shooting up the campus and I don't know, wrote some manifesto about hating women and how I don't remember. I didn't actually read it, but I think you're starting to see a little bit more violence here, and I guess I'm just fearful that
Yeah.
if we were to live in a society that was more common, we would just live in a more violent society. But maybe that's unfounded.
Yeah, I think it's almost like both is happening. Like at the same time, I think we're starting to break down a lot of the patriarchy and a lot more voices who were marginalized before are like able to get their voices heard. And also at the same time, we're still getting a lot of shit and our voices are being taken away. So it's both. Like I don't see the worst case scenario of like polygamy as a culture being the norm. And um, partners getting left in this place of not really having maybe emotional fulfillment, but they'll have like that more materialistic fulfillment. I don't see it happening. Because again, I think especially like from my work with a lot of women, we're starting to find our voice. We're not putting up with shit anymore. We're not putting up with dead end relationships and deadbeat relationships. Like we're done and over that, which yes, may increase the amount of incel type of people or behaviors that we see because we're not putting up with that shit anymore, right? And so who knows what will come next? I don't really I can't predict the future and I can't say. All I can say is I hope we do our best to treat others with kindness and that people work on themselves.
What do you see more commonly? Is it one male and multiple females, or one female, multiple males, or is it an even split?
I would say I mean it really is a combination. I'll see a lot of hetero presenting relationships where they look like a straight couple from the outside. They might be exploring a bisexual side. That's not so present to maybe their friends or family, and this is just something they explore within the bounds of their relationship agreement. So sometimes they'll be seen like same gender or non-binary genders as explorative partners, relationships. And sometimes it is opposite sex. So I can't really say, it's just a mixed bag. I see so many different kinds of dynamics in people. And it's beautiful. There's really in all of my time in the line of work I've never had a relationship structure that is the same as another one. There's always something different about the people I'm working with. There's always some sort of factor that is unique to their bond.
Yeah.
So I think it's really cool, and I get to meet so many unique people and so many unique perspectives.
Are you able to share a time where you guess you were dealing with jealousy or betrayal that kind of like challenged you professionally in any type of way?
Hmm. Trying to think. I think the hardest ones in those scenarios where we're dealing with jealousy or betrayal is when I'm working with a client, and this is usually individually, but sometimes I'm seeing them as a couple. But it's the person who's experienced the betrayal from the other partner, or they're experiencing jealousy in the relationship, and when they are so wrapped up into holding on to the relationship rather than respecting what their own true desires are and realizing that maybe this relationship isn't the one that is going to fulfill their desires, either on their own account or even with presenting all of the best communication skills possible, that they're not going to meet what they're really needing to be. It's a big challenge for me on the other end here, just kind of waiting and presenting all I can to get them where they want to be. But sometimes they're just like gritting their teeth and going through and agreeing to things. Even when we point out like this is part of their people pleasing behavior or part of like a protection, thing for them, that it's a challenge for me to watch them continue to engage in the self sabotage to themselves, like betray themselves almost, through after being betrayed by their partner,
Mm,
and sticking it out. So that's a tough part of the job for me.
yeah. I mean, it all goes back to, like, being honest with yourself, and I guess do you work on folks being able to, like, being assertive? Is that
Yeah.
something help them you okay,
Oh,
I would
yeah.
imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the aspect of being differentiated. So, like, again, that first part is identifying, like, what you want, what your thoughts are, what you desire, what your feelings you are experiencing. But that second part of differentiation is actually expressing that in a way that is kind and respectful. So, being able to let your partner know what your feelings are, not blaming them for it, because our feelings are coming up because of something in us. Our partner may have done the action and they may be involved, but the feelings are yours. You get to own your own feelings. And so if we can actually come from a place of saying, you know what? It actually really hurt and stung when I saw that you and Susan went to our favorite restaurant, because I realized that place was actually really special for me. In the future, can we talk about maybe in advance, like what restaurants you plan on going to? So I have a little bit of prep time knowing that, this would be something that you want to do. And maybe we could do something special so that I feel like we're really connected when you go out and, have that fun date with Susan next time.
Oh, man, that sounds so exhausting. I mean,
So, yeah.
just thinking about other people's feelings, I mean, for me, it's already tough doing that with one person, but
Yeah.
yeah, being able to, be on top of and, navigate through everyone's feelings is, sounds tiring. I'm not gonna lie. It sounds tiring, but that
Well, I'll say it's tiring for people who have never done this before. It's tiring for people who do not put this into regular practice. But once we start, it's a skill just like any other skill we build. We can get to a point where it becomes really automatic, and where it becomes really automatic where we're reading our partner, right? So maybe we read their body language and we say, "Bye, sweetheart, on the way to our favorite restaurant, insert whatever it is, with Susan." And then we notice, a drop in their facial expression, like maybe a look of like, oh, disappointment. And we see their body language just like drop down. And then in that moment, that's a beautiful opportunity for before he goes on that date to make a repair. If they can actually stick with them, stick with those feelings in the moment, instead of like, you know what? I'll take care of that later. They'll be fine. Let me go enjoy myself. Like, let me not let my partner ruin this date with Susan for me. I want to enjoy myself. How dare they take that away from me? Instead of doing that and going that direction and dropping into this place of caring for our partner, oh, they'll probably be totally on board with going on that date with Susan as soon as like their emotions are recognized, validated, and finding a place of action to help them feel more connected or whatever the problem was.
yeah. It sounds like work where, you set up, like, pre-sync calls, and you're like, "Okay, let's do some pre-sync calls, I'm gonna go out on a date with Susan, let's pre-sync with Jennifer beforehand," or
Yeah.
what her name is, and, afterwards, I'll do a quick debrief to make sure that, just to, like, ease her feelings if there are any, if there is any uneasing, feelings.
Yeah. Check-ins are great.
Um How do you respond to critics who might argue that non-monogamy can't provide like the same stability or security that traditional monogamous relationships might offer?
Say it one more time again for me.
Yeah, how do you respond to critics who argue that non-monogamy can't provide the stability and security that traditional monogamous relationships offer?
Mm. How you doing in your monogamous ones where your partner's cheating?
Fair
How
enough.
much security are you how much security you got in there? So that's one argument I would make. Um, but also even let's take cheating out of the picture. I mean, there are so many monogamous relationships where there's not stability, there's not security, there's not a good foundation. There's not good communication skills where the partners are taking each other into consideration in their normal day of life where they're not having that emotional connection. I see the relationships as the same. We're just adding in another layer of dynamics. I mean, if we're not already good and stable beforehand, sure as hell ain't gonna be better with adding more people into it. Like I wholeheartedly believe that concept. This is not a way to save your relationship. This is not the end all be all. This is not what will fix what is or may feel broken. So for the critics who think that it's not stable, who think that it can't be done, I say yes, I see a lot of people who do it beautifully. And a lot of people I don't see because they're doing so well and they don't need therapy. They don't need coaching and they're out there living their life having a good old time.
Could you discuss could you discuss like the impact that these relationships have on, I guess, children and family dynamics? I imagine that changes every relationship changes a lot when you have kids. I imagine this is even more complicated.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what kind of structures there are, how involved are these extramarital partners or extra partners, and was this introduced to them as a concept from the beginning, like of their birth, or is this more later on, and maybe they're a preteen or even an adult child, and they're learning about this dynamic in your relationship. So there are a lot of factors just right there of like, oh, kind of depends what will happen. But from the research that has been done, and there's this really great author and researcher named Eli Sheff or Dr. Elizabeth Sheff. She's got books and research studies on this about the bonds of families growing up in polyamorous dynamics or non monogamous dynamics. Oh, oh, there you are. Um, And so she talks about a lot of this, and from what the research shows, children are doing just fine, being raised by multiple parents. If anything, they get a lot of support. They get a lot of emotional support. They get a lot of, physical support of them being involved. You get more hands on deck. I mean, it helps create a sense of community. I would say probably the hardest thing is if they're in an environment, where people around them do not affirm or do not celebrate other different relationship structures, such as swinging, such as polyamory, whatever it is, then that may, come up as, something hard for the child or children involved. They might experience bullying just because people don't know what they don't know, and they think that things that are different may be wrong or maybe, just not right to be doing. So there can be that as an experience, but overall, like quality of life satisfaction for children growing up in non-monogamous dynamics are doing okay.
I would imagine I would imagine if it's like one male and multiple females and he impregnate. I guess I would imagine that all of the women would feel some sort of jealousy if one of them got pregnant, right? If one male and multiple females and one of them gets pregnant, I would imagine the other non-pregnant ones are starting to think, "Oh, this one has solidified her place
Mm.
in the in his life, right? She's
Yeah.
got it for at least the next 18 years, right? We are maybe more expendable. I would feel threatened. I would feel compelled to have a child myself to secure my place in in his life. And then I would imagine it'd be like some, like everyone would have kids and it'd be this weird Game of Thrones or Secession situation where all the kids are like, you know, quietly jockeying for position, for on the totem pole of on that will. Um, I don't know. Is that something that you've come across yet? That sounds super fun, and really interesting.
Yeah, that's TV, man. Like, I haven't seen anything like that in my work with people. Um, Again, and sometimes what happens is people come out later in their life as polyamorous or as wanting to explore open relationships. So they might have one already had the children that they wanted, or maybe they're at a point where the other kid or multiple kids have already grown up. And again, it's like kind of like a blended family. Like you marry someone and maybe you decide to all of a sudden have a kid, maybe when you already have like a 20-year-old or something like that. So it's the same dynamic of, just blended family dynamics,
Interesting.
which can
Um,
get complicated, always blended families, right?
yeah, I mean, it's already like when I first started dating my partner, I first started dating my wife. I didn't realize the time commitment, right? Obviously, we're going to be spending a lot of time together, but now I'm almost inheriting all of your friends. And the deeper this relationship goes, I'm inheriting like your family too, right? And obviously there's a lot of time commitment there, right? Not only do I have to go to my friends' birthday parties and family birthday parties, but now I have to go to your friends' birthday parties and your family's functions. So obviously, the more partners you add to the mix, I imagine it's just like your calendar is starting to look pretty intense. How does
Possibly.
yeah? I guess I'm kind of curious to know, like, how do holidays work? Do people just with multiple couples, with parents and stuff like that? Is it like, hey, we're gonna round robin and just this is who we're gonna visit this parents for this year, and we'll see you for Christmas again in another 3 or 4 years, or they roll a dice. How does, or is it so much so like, oh, this group is so big now that it just makes sense for everyone to come to this mothership, and that would be very interesting because you'd have like 3 or 4 families obviously coming together. Nice for,
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah. So it really, really depends. I mean, in some situations, parents may not be alive or family may not be alive. There may be situations where they don't talk to their family and there's no contact with their family anymore. So, like, that kind of already puts them in a position where that's actually not even a factor of like, oh, who do we go to? How do we navigate this? Right. So those are some situations how it plays out. Sometimes the families are not affirming, or maybe may not know about the relationship, so that may be taken off the table for that reason too. Um, so it really is a mixed bag. I can't really say on that.
Well, Paige, you've been an awesome, awesome guest. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I can't wait to do this again. Where
Same.
can people read more about your work, and where can they find you?
Yeah, people can read more about me and find more about me on my website at pagebond.com. You find all my stuff there. I'm also an expert on an app called Keepler. So we talk about relationships, we talk about dating advice. So if you want some advice, you can do that, or hop on my email list. You can do that by downloading my free jealousy workbook or my people pleasing workbook. Those are all over my website. So yeah, I love to connect, love to talk. So shoot me an email.
Will do. Well, till next time, it's been super fun, and everyone have a great night.